No Rest for the Wicked is a Souls-like game. The setting and themes are reflective of medieval times as we hear of a plague that has cursed the land. Our character is special. We are considered a Cerim, which is a bloodline of people who can absorb the plague and not become corrupted by it like many others already have. The video in the background is my gameplay of the latest Crucible update, which is essentially an endless arena where you can go through several different stages in an attempt to reach the area's final boss. At the beginning of the game, our Cerim is on board a ship, which crashes into the shore of Sacrament. Before our ship crashes, we're ambushed by Odessa and her crew. Odessa, we later learn, is the leader of a group called the Risen. In the ship scenes, before being raided by Odessa's band of pirates, we learn the basic survival skills. Gathering and crafting, the importance of food. We also learn how to move and navigate terrain. This includes shuffling along edges, or how to run and jump to bridge gaps. Something I noticed while interacting with the other people on the ship is that they see us as filthy. They can tell we're different, which led me to believe that Cerim to them might be cursed people. Once the ship crashes, we make our way to mainland, and eventually to Sacrament. There, we're treated like a saint, or an angel. We're meant to cleanse the plague. When reaching town, we meet Winnick and Ellsworth. Ellsworth is the leader of Sacrament, and Winnick is his right-hand man. In this scene, we also meet Celine, who acts under the newly proclaimed king, Magnus. Celine is a religious figure who wants to cast away the pestilence that plagues the land. When meeting our character, she believes we can help her achieve this. Celine's character is ruthless in her approach. I say this because in the same scene where we are introduced to every character, we see she has captured Odessa, the same person who crashed our ship. And at this point, we learn that Odessa is the daughter of Ellsworth. In this moment, Ellsworth has to make a choice. And inevitably that choice is to imprison his own daughter to appease the people of Sacrament, but most importantly, Celine. He's clearly hesitant to throw his daughter into prison. But he must, as a means to not seem weak to the public or enrage the church and the new proclaimed king. So far in the plot, we have yet to meet this king, but we do know from Celine that the original king prior had passed. This was Ellsworth's brother. Now, his son is the new king. As the plot continues, we learn more about these characters, but seeing how this game is still in early development, there isn't much to go off of. So far, we understand that there is a power hierarchy where the will of the church surpasses the power Ellsworth had. And since the previous king, his brother, is now deceased, it seems he no longer has support from the kingdom. As the Cerim, we also feel no freedom to decline Celine's suggestion, so this takes precedence in our task list. The gameplay is customizable and allows the player the freedom to play how they want. There are different weapons and classes associated with each build. There is a menu dedicated to weapons and attire with additional slots for accessories. Each item our Cerim can wield has attributes to them, but also requires specific levels and build points. When I say build points, that refers to our Cerim's attributes that they themselves hold each time that they level up. Each level gives them one skill point that they could put into either health, stamina, strength, dexterity, intelligence, faith, focus, or equipment load. For my playthrough, I focused on strength, health, equipment load, and stamina in that order of importance. Strength made it so my weapons dealt more damage. Health increased my health points. Equipment load made it so that my character can wear and hold heavier items. This also positively affects my ability to avoid becoming over-encumbered and increases my agility speed. Stamina increase allows my character to do consecutive hits to a target before they become exhausted. Looking at the other build points, there didn't seem to be any significant usage besides focus, which can be used to activate a single powerful move in combat. The other points just seem to be requirements to properly wield certain weapons or equipment. I've also mentioned before that we can gather resources. Referring back to the ship, we gathered food-related items, but once we reach mainland, we can collect ore, wood, leather, and so on. These resources can be used for the player's use, but it's encouraged for the player to use these resources to put into the town. At the start of the game, The town of Sacrament is in shambles and requires assistance with rebuilding and furthering its development. Each development plan will use up your collected resources and take time to be built. The game uses real time, I should also add. So, if a town upgrade takes an hour to be completed and therefore usable, then that means an actual hour must pass before you can access it. This can be irritating due to the circumstances, but there are many things a player can do to bide their time in between waiting for a production to be finished. In the long run, this helps the player to have access to more powerful assets from merchants who live in the city. Merchants ranging from an inn's keep, a restaurant, a furniture store, blacksmith shop, tailors, magic shop, and a random scrap item shop. Most of these shops help for combat purposes, but the furniture store is important for when you purchase a home in Sacrament. Originally, when first getting into town, you're living in the tower, but after completing a few tasks and missions, you're able to purchase a home in Sacrament. This way, you can store your places in your own home instead of the tower, which is a public place. Oh, and yes, this game does allow for online play. So the tower is essentially the base game hub for all the players to go to sleep, visit, store items. I personally haven't used this mode, but it can infer that when purchasing a home, you are separating yourself from the group and claiming your own space. This way, sharing an item that you store away is a choice. Something important to consider is that No Rest for the Wicked shows the importance of community and how one action on your part can create a positive ripple effect. And in the end, benefiting not only the NPCs, but also the players. The same can be said for online play. By helping one another, it could easily come full circle. Tasks and side quests are given to help the pacing of the game, as well as keep the players occupied while the production team furthers the plot. But in a way, it adds to this understanding of community. By doing all these tasks, we become more and more involved in the community of Sacrament, eventually being able to claim a house there and officially consider Sacrament our home. The history behind the Cerim is still quite a mystery to many people in Sacrament. What we do know is that Cerim is seen in two ways: a harbinger of death or a blessing who is summoned to dispel evil. The only person who might have a clear clue to the existence of Cerim is the Watcher. He can permanently improve us by using Plagued Ichor, dropped by bosses and mini-bosses. Sadly, at this point in time, his memory is lost. He tends to speak in loops or doesn't speak at all. His apprentice Rowan, on the other hand, talks quite a bit. Rowan shows much interest in his master's work and helps give us leads early on. And there is another person in Sacrament who has much interest in the Cerim. Elsa tends to go on the field instead of sitting in a tower waiting to find answers, though. Elsa, as mentioned, is more hands-on, and she manages to lead us to an old training ground used by the Cerim previously. We learn here that only Cerim can have access to these grounds by sacrificing some of their blood. This is the section that is most associated with the Crucible update. This section seems to hold the true nature of the Cerim, and also hints at a potential corruption within the Cerim's history. When entering the trials, halfway through the first run, we meet a new vendor called the Seneschal. Historically, Seneschals were a part of a noble family's court, who were in charge of administration of servants, in charge of domestic arrangements, and the list goes on. One of these tasks can even be the supervision of financial issues, which makes sense why we meet the Seneschal in a vault of gold. In the context of the game, he acts as a vendor and helps us improve our items and the gameplay within the trials, but he can only do this within the trials. Only thing that the Cerim can take outside of the trials is any exalted equipment. Any other element introduced within the training grounds is solely for use during the training grounds. There's a bit of mystery to why the exalted attribute to our weapons stays, but everything else dissipates. Still trying to figure that out, but it does beg the question if anything else can leave that realm. Finally, there's combat. This makes up a significant amount of the game, but in reality, it's just a vehicle for the plot. We are given our standard regular attack, heavy attack, 1 to 2 special moves, dodge, sprint, parry, block, or guard, but you can only do this if you have a shield, and the ability to use an item in your inventory. This gives the player a wide range of actions to use, and it's all affected by the equipment your Cerim holds. Expanding on what I've said before, If your Cerim isn't holding a shield on their person, then they can't necessarily block. But if they have a larger sword or a large enough weapon, they can parry. Another thing that's available to the player are 3 weapon slots, which allows a player to put 3 different weapons in each slot. Then, when they're in battle, they can quick change to each weapon. This opens the doorway to more flexible fighting methods depending on the enemy you're facing. This is also great because going into the menu or your inventory doesn't pause the game. So with less steps, it makes it significantly easier for playability. Sadly, this is not the case for items that you can use mid-battle. These items include food, potions, and explosives. Food is good for replenishing health. Some potions can cause damaging status effects, while others replenish focus or stamina. And potions are interesting in this aspect because there are 3 different sizes associated with different power levels. And explosives are used to cause massive damage or create a damaging area effect for multiple enemies. But in a combat situation, there's no way to easily select which stack of items should be prioritized. Before going into battle, you can pick which item stack you want to use in combat. All you have to do is press the down pad if you're using controller, and it'll automatically use it. And then it'll set that item on a timer for when you can use it again. This way, a player can't spam the items to break the combat. But the problem starts when you run out of that specific stack that you selected. Let's say I picked soup so that I could replenish. Once I run out of soup, it'll automatically pick another random item in my bag. If I'm lucky, it'll be another food item, but not all food items are the best. There are tiers to simple foods to more complex dishes that the more complex ones will give me more HP recovery. So essentially, it comes off as the game not being able to tell what item would be better because you can't necessarily select the better item and then the next best item after that, so it just randomly picks whatever it can. I don't necessarily consider this to be a poor choice or condition of the game. Honestly, it makes sense to a certain degree. Essentially, our Cerim is in the midst of battle and trying to grab any item they can out of their bag. It's a stressful situation, and if they pick an item that isn't ideal, it's appropriate for the circumstance. This will also put a lot of stress on the player and force them to do better. In most cases, when this happens to me, I try to make distance, quickly open my menu, and switch out the item for the one that I need. All of these attributes in this section were from the base game, before their latest update. How the trials work is essentially there are, I believe, 5 phases in the beginning and 5 phases afterwards, with a moment to speak to Seneschal in between those. After defeating the enemies in each stage, you can either move on to the next one or add the points that you get to your echoes. These echoes are essentially temporary buffs or sacrificial based buffs. The training grounds can be quite frustrating, but they are fun. The level design and enemy placement in each level feels random and pretty much like a toss-up. Sometimes you'll get lucky and have an easy room with standard enemies in a full-fledged floor, and other times you're in a room with mostly islands paired with invasive and aggressive enemy types. I couldn't tell you how many times I panic rolled off the sides of these ledges and rolled to my death. There are many different enemy types in this game, and I'd love for an in-game encyclopedia to be added so that you can review these monsters and potentially their backstory and where they might have come from. But many of these monster types can range from a classic archer or a swordsman to leeches and even groups of dogs. They really managed to make the story behind the enemies interesting when they introduced plagued individuals. These people look different from your standard mobs that were first introduced. This plague is known as the pestilence, and the pestilence can corrupt any being, anything that's alive. So the same dogs that we see in the first area or the rats that we meet along the way can easily become corrupted and turn into these grotesque versions of themselves. When encountering plagued people, I most commonly end up facing caged, heavy-hitting prisoners, bloated enemies who are filled with leeches and they like to try and grab you, or larger bosses that are stronger and faster than the rest. As the story progresses, we see a spike in the pestilence and its appearance. So in previous areas that used to be normal, now they have enemies that are corrupted running about. The map has an interesting characteristic to it. There are around 4 different areas that you can go to at this time of production, and the map menu can make certain areas disappear if you don't frequent them enough. This allows for enemies in that area to redeploy. Keep in mind that this is very different from other games like Dark Souls that respawn the same entities. Once you've cleared the area, they don't respawn. Not even after you use a rest stop in other games, but these are more so travel wisps for this one. Even then, they don't respawn. After a certain amount of time has passed, that's when different mobs redeploy in certain areas that you've not frequented. This will happen quite often because there's only a few wisps on the map to travel to, and traversal overall does take time. Another element to the mapping and placement of areas in the game are shortcuts and secret areas. I've only ever found one secret area, and it wasn't much of a secret. They literally put it right in front of your face. I just took a really long time to figure out how to get there. But the shortcuts are scattered here and there throughout the entire map. I even consider the sewers to be a major shortcut. Even though you still have to traverse it, I find that you don't know it's there until later in the game after you've reached a certain point. Then you're able to access it, and it gets you from the beach where you first crashed all the way to Sacrament, at the lower portion of Sacrament, also known as like the lower city. People are living there, and they represent the poor who were cast out into the depths of the city. I vaguely remember interacting with some of the prisoners and some other NPCs, and apparently most of the original rebels were townspeople from the lower city. So it's very possible that the rebel group was meant to be about justice and taking matters into their own hands. This is only a speculation because I haven't found definitive proof. What I do know is that the rebels weren't always a band of crooks and murderers. The significance of the group either became prevalent or shifted when the pestilence became more of a threat. As I mentioned before, the lower city is very much out of the way to get to. We, as the Cerim, mainly frequent the market and upwards towards the upper city. On top of this, no one really talks about the lower city. Even in the city improvement plans that we could assist with, they never mention any improvements planned that could help develop the lower city. This economic divide within the city is very clear, which might have led to the significant actions taken, even if that action had to be an aggressive one. No Rest for the Wicked, for where it's at, is pretty good. There's much that can be learned from this production. And even though it's an action game, it makes a great point of not making that the entire purpose. They take care in the plot they are trying to portray, and I hope they remain to dedicate time to telling the story of Sacrament and the Cerim. Like I've said before, I would love to get more content from them, but not orientated around combat. Instead, lore. I really would love to see an encyclopedia for the world they're building. I've always been fascinated with the behind-the-scenes world building that often gets overlooked, so being able to get a sneak peek at this would be an exciting endeavor. But I'm very excited to see where this game leads, and I will most definitely probably be playing it, but I would love to revisit this topic and probably make another video for it. If any of you are also interested in this game and want to have a little discussion below in the comment section, please go ahead and have a nice day.